Hello and welcome to another episode of Wild of Africa. I'm Eric Njoka. This week, Africa is feeling the heat. Every day, more and more extreme weather events are happening across the continent, destroying lives and displacing thousands. Floods, heat waves, droughts, wildfires and cyclones are taking place at unprecedented and unpredictable rates, leaving utter devastation in their wake. Millions across our continent have been left facing food insecurity, water shortages, disease and extreme poverty. Nothing about this is normal or inevitable. We'll talk about that shortly. Thank you very much for joining us. This week we begin from West Africa, and there is a new friend that has been beckoned by Niger, which recently severed ties with France and the US, with the junta government demanding the full withdrawal of their troops from the nation. Can you guess who their new partner is? I will let our cover report answer that for you.
Protests and huge demos are the new normal in West Africa. This is Niamey, the capital of Niger, where hundreds thronged the streets just weeks ago. The last US troop deployment left, and months prior to the American departure, French troops also exited the country.
We don't want Americans on our territory. And by the way, it is not just the American military base. We don't want them on our territory because we can't understand it.
And now there is a new guest in Niger, Russia. This is the Ilyushin 76 transporter plane touching down at the country's international airport. Niger state television reported that 100 Russian military instructors reached the Sahel nation to train their forces in the use of new Russian military hardware.
We are here to train Niger's army using the military equipment that has arrived. It's equipment for different military specialities, for promoting military specialities. We are here to develop military cooperation between Russia and Niger.
Since its July 2023 coup, the military junta that seized power in Niamey has kicked out French and European forces. It also quit the economic community of West African states' regional bloc.
It's a trend that exists, and we can afford it insofar as the Russians will be here as part of a win-win cooperation.
Diversifying doesn't mean choosing sides. And until I have proof to the contrary, I don't think Niger has chosen Russia's side against the other blocs. We sided with Russia because it offers us the opportunity to equip ourselves militarily, to equip our space, to ensure its security.
At the protest site, a handwritten sign in English read, "God curse USA," in a show of support for the junta and its mid-March decision to revoke an accord that allowed around 1,000 US military personnel to operate out of two bases. Speculation of Russian President Vladimir Putin touring the Sahel or West Africa has grown recently. The Kremlin hasn't issued any statement or clarification. The arrival of Russian military instructors and equipment is further evidence of the junta's openness to closer cooperation with Moscow. A few Russian flags were visible at the protest, but citizens were still apprehensive about the Russian defense assistance in Niger. Bureau Report, WION The World is One.
A year of war between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has driven more than 8.5 million people from their homes, creating the world's largest displacement crisis and uprooting families multiple times as people struggle to escape to neighboring countries with economic and security problems of their own. Financial challenges have led some to return to the war-stricken capital. Here's a report.
These were the first images from Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the morning of April 15, 2023. Columns of black smoke rose as the country's armed forces and a paramilitary group clashed in a struggle for power. Both the military and the RSF claimed they had control of the airport and other key installations in Khartoum, where fighting raged overnight. Within weeks, the war had spread to other regions. Along the path, thousands of civilians were killed. The conflict also forced millions to flee in an exodus that is still active to date. Many reached neighboring countries where the situation became even worse. World leaders, the Pope and human rights agencies condemned the war, even tried to bring the warring generals Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo to the talks table. But those efforts failed miserably. The generals, one an army chief and the other a paramilitary commander, still don't see eye to eye. The army chief even started a sort of shuttle diplomacy. He headed to the United Nations headquarters to convince the world that his foe was the hindrance to peace. After New York, al-Burhan tried to garner support from several African nations to eradicate the rapid support forces or to at least stop the war.
As we mark 1 year of vicious conflict, a grim milestone by any standard, I urge the Sudan Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces to protect civilians and guarantee unimpeded humanitarian access. I'm disturbed by continuing reports of attacks on civilians, including what appears to be on an ethnic basis in Darfur, and vital civilian infrastructure such as hospitals. The UN is particularly worried about conditions in Darfur.
A year of war has driven over 8.5 million people from their homes. Waves of ethnically driven violence were unleashed in the western region of Darfur before they spread to other areas, including Gezira State, an important farming region that became an aid hub where many sought refuge.
We're not looking at the economic situation now. We're more concerned with the safety aspect. My children now, one of them is Saleh. He still sleeps with me until now because the sounds of bangs and explosions scare him. He still wakes up scared at night unless he sleeps next to me.
The United Nations has called for more humanitarian assistance for those displaced people fleeing Sudan. Despite the magnitude of the crisis, UNHRC says funding is critically low and threatens aid deliveries. And that's where Germany comes in. The European nation will provide a further 244 million euros or $260 million in humanitarian aid to Sudan. This announcement was made at a conference organized by France where several foreign ministers and diplomats marked the first anniversary of the devastating conflict.
They need food, nutrition, clean drinking water, baby food, medicines, clothing, schools, emergency accommodation, and actually, above all, psychological treatment. Germany will therefore today make a further 244 million euro in humanitarian aid available to provide these people with what is needed for survival.
Thousands of civilians have been killed, although the death toll estimates are highly uncertain and both sides are accused of committing war crimes. Despite not having a definitive day or timeline of when the hostilities may end, another threat is looming: famine. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Malian political parties and civil society groups jointly rejected the ruling junta's order to suspend political activities and vowed to mount a legal challenge to what one opposition politician called the dictatorial move. The West African country has been under military rule since a coup in 2020. Tensions have risen in recent weeks, leading major parties and other organizations jointly to call out the junta on March 31st for not scheduling elections within the promised time frame. Here's a report.
Mali's junta has suspended political party activities Wednesday evening. Government spokesperson Abdoulaye Maiga announced in a statement that a decree has been issued. It suspends until further notice all activities by political parties and associations of a political nature on the grounds of maintaining public order, according to the statement. Mali has been under military rule since August 2020. The country's current junta seized power in a second coup in 2021 and later promised to restore civilian rule by March 26, 2024, following elections in February this year. However, The junta said in September last year that it would indefinitely postpone February elections for technical reasons, sparking outrage among political groups. Many reacted again after last month's transition deadline passed without a vote. Some of Mali's main political parties and civil society groups on March 31st called for a time frame for elections. Major opposition coalition and the toppled ex-president's party said in a joint statement with over 20 signatories that they would use all legal and legitimate avenues for the return of normal constitutional order.
You are watching World of Africa on WION World is One. Time now for a short break. When we return, we'll tell you about some seeds that are cultivating hope for Kenya's agricultural future. Stay with us.
Ready to dive into your daily dose of news?
Bringing you what's trending in the West and all that's setting trends in the East.
And all of this served up with a side of insightful banter.
We don't just bring you the latest stories.
We bring you your talking points for the day.
And while you do that, from the busy streets of New York, I will provide you with deeper insights on the developments through the course of the day in the U.S.
And I will be here at the WION headquarters, getting you all the action from the universe of sport. All that you need to know about your favorite teams and players, right here.
The show that keeps you ahead of the global curve. A conversation you'd want to be a part of. A place where news becomes an engaging exchange.
We bring you stories that impact your present.
This is World DNA. Join the conversation.
Welcome back to World of Africa on WION World is One. We are glad you're watching. Activists are urging governments in Africa to declare a climate emergency and take climate action now. Climate change and droughts also have significant impacts on conflicts in Africa. Severe droughts in Africa are an existential threat to its herders and farmers who depend on rain-fed agriculture. According to the State of the Climate in Africa 2023 report, the continent is warming faster than the global average. Here's a report highlighting the vagaries of climatic changes on the continent.
The wrath of climate and its vagaries are showing in Africa. The change in the seasonal cycle and unpredictable weather patterns are causing mayhem across the continent. Every region is facing a different calamity. Let's start with East Africa. Rainfall in Kenya has been on a constant since last year. The floods are now a menace. Heavy rains and flooding in Kenya caused heavy destruction in several parts on Thursday. Local media reports put the death toll from flooding in recent days at 11, with over 2,000 people displaced. Kenya's meteorological department has warned the country is set to experience very high rainfall and asked people to prepare for floods.
We have people who have been internally displaced who don't have a place to call home, no roof on top of their heads. Their farmlands have been submerged, and we are also talking about high rates of wildlife animal conflict. Here we are talking about hippopotamus that are marauding within the community, scavenging for pasture because their grazing lands have been submerged. And this is really a threat to the community and causing a lot of insecurity.
And while it pours in the east, it is scorching further south. This is Malawi. The crop theft has become a problem as the food sources are drying up. Maize farmers are concerned. Their farms are failing because of the drought. They are on the verge of hunger.
We have been hit so badly with dry spells here, and looking at our situation, the problems are huge, and this is just the beginning of bigger problems ahead. Imagine we don't have food this month, and how do we survive until next year the same month? It will be tough.
In response, Malawi President Lazarus Chakwera asked international aid agency donors to help the country avoid hunger. The drought is devastating and stressful for many Malawians. Most cannot pay back creditors, money borrowed for their farms. Southern Africa is reeling from its worst drought in years due to a combination of naturally occurring El Nino, that is an abnormal warming of the waters in the East African Pacific that radiates heat in the air, leading to hotter weather across the world and higher average temperatures produced by greenhouse gas emissions. In the last month, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Zambia have all declared a state of disaster from the drought. 70-year-old Mandisire Mbirinu and her 13-year-old grandson are seen here in the blistering sun, shelling the few maize cobs they retrieved from their crops due to the drought in Zimbabwe's Matobo province. Mbirinu considers herself lucky. She managed to harvest a few bags of maize on her sparsely irrigated plot. Most crops around the area were a write-off.
This is by far the worst drought in years. Ever since I was born, I have never seen such a drought. This year it's too much. We are going to starve. We were expecting that we would harvest and sell to the national granary, but that will not happen. The heat was just too much. We last had rains in January. By the time the rains came back briefly, part of my crops had already wilted.
Zimbabwe's president declared the drought a national disaster and even appealed for over $2 billion to save 2.7 million people from hunger. The weather across the world has turned nasty in the past year, as climate change has doubled down on the impacts of El Nino, making its effects more extreme. A study last October even suggested that human-induced climate change may now be as significant in triggering El Nino conditions as natural causes like sun rays. Aid agency Oxfam warned in late February 2024 that over 24 million people in southern Africa face hunger, malnutrition, and water scarcity because of the drought. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Seeds specifically bred to withstand climate change could help farmers in Kenya. Scientists and farmers have worked together to create a bean that can cope with the country's drought conditions. Here's a report from Taita, Kenya.
These are no ordinary beans. They are climate-smart beans. Seeds that could be the answer to growing crops in a world with shifting weather. In a pioneering collaboration, an initiative is underway to popularize a new bean variety tailored for Kenya's diverse climatic conditions. Dubbed Nyota, meaning star in Kiswahili, these beans signify more than just agricultural resilience.
We developed bean varieties that are climate smart, by using varieties that are drought and heat tolerant. They have no fragrance, and they have high levels of iron and zinc. So by crossing and back crossing those varieties, we came up with a bean variety that is heat and drought tolerant, and also cold, that also fits in the cold dry hierarchy.
Kenya's agricultural landscape presents a spectrum of challenges, from arid lowlands to cold dry highlands, each with its own climatic demands. The focus is to make sure drought doesn't kill the beans before they flourish.
When we are breeding, we normally take into account the aspect of market, because the cooking time will give us varieties that cook faster, and when they cook faster, they reduce the cost of fuel, like for example gas and firewood, which probably will reduce the cost of living for the farmers.
Nyota beans hold immense promise for Kenya's agricultural sector. By enlisting farmers to cultivate these resilient varieties, the initiative aims to bolster national bean production that currently falls short of meeting the annual consumption demand.
I can harvest 9 to 12 bags from an acre of land, unlike other varieties where I would only get 5 to 7 bags. The difference upon comparison is substantial.
The Kenyan government has strict regulations on seed exchange. Despite the challenges, by fostering collaboration between scientists, farmers and policymakers, initiatives like Nyota beans offer a ray of hope for a more sustainable and resilient agricultural future in Kenya. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And finally, in a forested area outside the Ugandan capital, young people meet up to wrestle in the soft mud. They dream of one day emulating their heroes and joining wild wrestling entertainment. Here is their story from Kampala.
Preparing the battleground. In the mid-morning heat, the soil is tilled and vetted inside a makeshift wrestling ring. Young Ugandans are gathering in Mukono district to take part in a soft ground wrestling competition. A dramatic announcement hails the arrival of the first contestants. The training sessions imitate the pro wrestling contests the teens regularly see on television. While a pair tangles inside the ring made from bamboo poles strung with sisal rope, on the ringside, people cheer the muscular show of strength. They mimic every move, action and sound as their famous idols in the world wrestling entertainment combat sports.
I started watching wrestling in 2019. Then I was like, these guys, they can do that. I was very amazing. It was very amazing. Even me, I told myself in me, and I said, no, one day I will maybe, if God wishes, if we can be with us Academy of Wrestling here in Uganda, one day I will join.
The Uganda Soft Wrestling Group is a relative newcomer. It started in 2023. It was founded by Daniel Cedric Bumba, known in the local wrestling community as Bumbash. Now he's a pioneer, known to a small group of fans in Uganda who follow pro wrestling on television but are aspiring to make it widely popular.
This pro wrestling, it has not been here in Africa, East Africa, for example, but we've heard of it in Nigeria and South Africa. So I wanted to introduce a new thing on the block whereby it comes from the inner me, because I have the zeal, the adoration and the love for the game.
Bumba hopes that some of these wrestlers, many of them orphans, can do well and long enough to go professionals.
So far I've never had an injury, serious injury. Like the injuries we get like this, but it's not serious injuries, right? Like you have like a shock, yeah? like a shock, and then you go to the clinic, then they prepare you, like 2 or 3 weeks, then you get set, then you come back, but it's not always serious.
Some of the young wrestlers imagine a future on the biggest wrestling stage of all. Maybe the wrestling in the mud could one day very well lead to a WWE Championship belt coming to Uganda. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Thank you very much for watching this week's episode of Wild of Africa on WION World is One. Get in touch with us on all our social media platforms and tell us how you feel about the show there. I'm Eric Njoka, and until next time, it's goodbye from me.